Alright, how's it going, guys? It is Glake once again back from the Avid Entries / thephantompages.com, and we are going to be continuing more of Teal'c's completion process today. This is probably going to be another long one, since we are now on to the point in the book where we're going through all of the steps of the completion process, and I'm kind of just running through all of them pretty quickly, but these chapters are pretty lengthy, so it is late at the time that I'm recording this, and there's actually another video that I need to do for my other channel at some point, so I may actually split this one into two parts. I'll check the time depending, but I'm thinking maybe I will do, so today is steps 7 through 13 for this chapter. I'm thinking maybe I'll cover steps 7 to 10, or maybe 7 to 9, and then do the rest in a part 2, but it really depends on where I am time-wise once I reach that point. I think maybe I could sacrifice an hour, but I've got to be wary of my time here, so we're going to hop right into it. This is Chapter 7, Steps 7 through 13, Validation and Relief. When we experience something traumatic, we often get stuck in a kind of holding pattern where we can't get past what happened. At the time, we did not know how to resolve the situation. We felt some degree of powerlessness. We assumed there was no way to improve the situation, and as a result, many of our needs went unmet. But by re-experiencing the memory and then altering the memory so as to create mental and emotional resolution, we create resolution in our current life. We begin to meet emotional needs and set ourselves free from the past. The next 7 steps in the completion process walk you through this part of the process. I have detailed below the key points to understand as you go through steps 7 through 13. Step 7. Step into adult perspective within the memory. When you feel ready, step out of the perspective of your younger self and instead begin to view the scene from the perspective of your current adult self. This is the step where the adult self intervenes. You are still within the memory, but now you are watching it as an adult, not as a child or younger person. This is the step that enables us to reparent ourselves. The child self may feel as if he has no advocates, no one to speak up for him and protect him. This is your opportunity to be that advocate for your child self. When we experience trauma, we feel powerless. In this step, we are taking our power back. The child self doesn't need to grow up and defend himself. The child self needs to be allowed to be a child and to have an adult who parents him in the proper way. The child self needs an adult who cares about him enough to be unconditionally present, to meet his needs, and to alter the circumstance so the child's experience feels better. As you enter this step in the process, be aware that you may need to introduce yourself to your child self if he doesn't immediately recognize you. Your child self may not instantly trust you, so you may have to demonstrate your unconditional care for a while before he can come to trust you. This is all good. When you are demonstrating your unconditional care for your inner child, you are demonstrating your unconditional care for yourself, so as an adult, you are also learning to trust yourself again. It may be helpful to tell your inner child what year it actually is and what is going on, or why you have chosen to come back in time to interact with him. Step 8. Validate the child's emotions. In this step, the adult takes the time to offer comfort, affection, and unconditional focused presence to your child self. The object is to validate the child's emotions. What I mean is that you are validating the emotions you felt as a child within that memory. Clearly and gently give the child the message that it's all right and it's okay to feel how she feels, and give the child permission to fully experience her feelings. If you feel ill-equipped to do this yourself, then call the safe support figure that you created in step 1 to validate the emotion your child self is feeling. This validation step is a step in the process that most inner child therapists or approaches seem to skip. In my mind, this is a travesty because it's the most crucial step when we are doing inner child work. When we are working with the inner child, we usually rush to take the child away from the feeling, wanting to immediately make her feel better. By doing this, we miss what the child needs, and we also send the message that the way she is feeling has to change because something is wrong with it. But skipping this crucial point of validation is unwise because the cause of most disassociation in children is having their emotions invalidated, dismissed, or disapproved of. The child learned early on that they were expected to separate from an aspect of themselves, and they learned to banish it to the subconscious. In doing so, these children became fractured. In other words, it's the invalidation, dismissal, and disapproval of a child's emotions that causes him to fragment and be unable to move through the experience and integrate the feeling or event within himself when something traumatic happens. And we all know that the outcome. The person becomes wounded and reactive. He grows up and starts to manifest experiences that mirror the original trauma, but now the mirror is happening during his adult life. Thus, we have the reason for the completion process in the first place. Now, in this step 8, you can personally give your child self the validation he requires within this memory, and in doing so, you are fixing the skipping CD. You are allowing your child self to move through the original experience and integrate the experience so that he can move forward. This creates the ability and willingness for the fractured and stuck aspect of your own consciousness to rejoin you, and you will become more whole. To use the earlier metaphor of the river and streams, you are taking the streams that had branched off and bringing them back to join the main river. How to validate emotions. Here is an example of how we might validate our inner child's emotions. Sticking with the earlier storyline, let's assume that we joined our inner child in a memory that involved a birthday party. At that birthday party, for a sister or brother, our inner child felt jealous because he was not getting any presents. This made the child feel unloved, unvalued, and insignificant. It also filled her with a sense of lack because she was watching another child get so much abundance, love, value, and significance. In our example, now we are serving as the parent figure to our child self in the scene. We don't instantly try to make our child self feel better or less joyous. We don't instantly get her a toy. Or less jealous. We don't instantly get her a toy. Instead, we validate the child's feelings. Validating feelings is not the same as validating that they are correct in their version of truth. In the event that the validation of their truth In the event that the validation of their truth will do them more harm than good. In other words, we don't say, "You're right, they don't love you, and they don't value you, and the other child is more significant than you." Instead, we comfort the child and validate the child's feeling by saying something like, "You're right to feel this way. Anyone who is in this situation would feel this way. It's totally understandable how you would feel like people love the other child more. It makes sense that you would feel sad because you aren't getting what the other person is getting. I'd feel that way if I were you, but I'm here with you no matter what. It's okay that you feel this way. You have a right and a valid reason to feel the way you do." Then we remain present with the child however he or she feels a result of the validation. Keep in mind that, on occasion, a child might actually need his version of truth, not just his emotions validated in order to move forward. For example, if a child is being abused but is constantly told by the perpetrator that he is just told by the perpetrator that he is just being given I don't know why it's so hard for me to say that he is just being given a bath in the places that he is dirty, this can create cognitive dissonance in the child great enough to be its own state of mental trauma. Therefore, during this step, we would also affirm that he is right in feeling that he is getting abused. It's natural to have a reaction to being validated when it finally happens, and usually the reaction is a good one. The child experiences a release and a sense of acceptance, and he or she can shift into an emotional readiness to move forward on his or her own into solution. However, sometimes more painful emotions, such as sadness, come up. When this is the case, continue to validate those new feelings and remain present with those feelings as well. The point here is that you must be unconditionally there with the child, without needing the child to feel different than how they feel. This step is not about feeling better. It's about being with the child's feelings. Remember, we are never ready to find a solution until we have accomplished this step. If you truly feel that you can't do this step in the process for your inner child, then get your safe support figure to do it. For example, if your figure was an angel, then imagine the angel coming into the scene with you and comforting and validating your inner child instead. Sometimes, in order to do this step well, we need to quite literally stop time and give the child all the time he or she needs to process the validation, accept it, and experience the support we are giving them. We must freeze the scene. During this step, we are usually seeing the memory in motion, so the dogs may still be running around and the parents may still be yelling and so on. But we want to do something that helps our mind see the scene as frozen. If this extra time is necessary for the child, I often suggest that the adult helper snap her fingers. I tell the child that when he hears a sound, the memory will stand still. It should look to them as if they pushed the pause button on a video and everything became still. Everything within the scene needs to be paused mid-motion, so the only things that are still in a state of live action are your adult self and your child self, and, if the case calls for it, the third-party safe support figure. After this group has moved through this step, and the next two steps after this group has moved through this step and the next two steps of the completion process with the scene around them on pause, remember to snap your fingers again, which will restore the memory to full motion. I'm going to turn my AC off for the rest of this. I almost fell over trying to do that. Step 9. Await relief. At this point, wait for your child self in the scene to naturally move in the direction of feeling relief. Keep in mind that your childhood self may just need you to confirm that you will be there for her forever, just as she is, regardless of what happens. So offer this protection and reassurance to your child self. For example, a child who loses a favorite toy doesn't need to be told to get over it or when to stop feeling bad about it. They need to be allowed to move entirely through the emotional experience and fully feel it, because the feelings are valid, and the improvement eventually happens on its own. The child may get mad and then collapse in tears, and then, if the child has unconditional focused presence from an adult, he will naturally stop crying and resume interest in something else or come up with a solution on his own. This is what will happen in your visualization of the memory. You may notice that your inner child, once validated and given your unconditional focused presence, may instantly start to feel relief. Or they might have a kind of emotional release and start crying, only to very quickly resume their desire to play. Their overall vibration improves on its own in response to the previous step. However, if you notice that there is no improvement, as can be common with an intense emotion like grief, then you need to give your inner child the message that you are not going to rush her, that nothing is more important than her, and that you care about her process above all else. You may need to simply stay with the child unconditionally while she experiences whatever emotion she is experiencing for as long as it takes. When this is the case, just keep affirming that you will be there for as long as she wants you to be there, no matter what. Have faith that eventually the child will feel enough relief that she will begin to move toward improvement, such as sitting up and sniffing or smiling or wanting to do something else with you. If it's clear that the child just needs us to be there and our presence is the most healing step for her at this time, she may not actually progress naturally into a better feeling state. If this happens, we have two choices. We may choose to mentally leave our adult aspect there with the child and return our consciousness to the room we are sitting in, or we can skip to step 15 and take the child self to the safe haven, continuing to be present with the child and observing how the child feels when she reaches the safe haven. An inability to reach the stage of relief is particularly common if people have experienced trauma involving their negative emotions. So, for example, if a person grew up in a home where it was never okay to be unhappy, and especially bad to stay unhappy, often this person needs to learn it's okay to be unhappy or to stay unhappy. What is really going on is that the aspect of him that needs to be reintegrated is the aspect of him that is permanently unhappy. Within the memory turned visualization, The way the child self feels will not improve because the acceptance and unconditional, focused presence given to the unimproving nature of his emotions is what is needed. Where are we at here? Can't see how long this has been recording for. Oh, but not that long. We're at step 10, so we can keep going. Step 10. Call back other fractured aspects of self. In this is a step where you call back to other fractured aspects of yourself that are present in that one particular scene that you have been viewing. Lovingly merge those long fractured aspects of the child into the core of your childhood self. Now you will be dealing with only one child self in the scene, as compared to having to deal with a child and a number of as compared to having to deal with a child and a number of fractured parts of that child. Be aware that in a moment of trauma, we may not only split off from ourselves so as to create one fracture within our stream of consciousness, we may split off many more times. This is especially true if the memory was particularly traumatic. We have other fractured aspects that are not frozen. I call these the coping aspects. A coping aspect of our consciousness is a fracture of the self that chooses to leave the traumatic experience so as to experience something else that feels better or safer. For example, a girl who is being molested may fracture into multiple selves at the time of trauma. One aspect may shrink and project itself into the carpet fibers as if it is hiding. Another might choose to shrink and go into the snow globe sitting on the table. Another might go into a fantasy life where she is a princess. Another aspect might project itself into the clouds or into outer space, and yet another aspect might hide in the closet. By calling back all of these fractured aspects, we are asking them to be willingly and unconditionally rejoin the primary traumatized child self. The message to those aspects is, it's time to come back and move forward because there is a solution now. When those fractured aspects merge back into the child self, each aspect receives the same healing. As a result, the adult person now has much more consciousness available in much the same way that a river would have more water flowing through it once a number of branch off streams have rejoined it. So you can see how this step adds an extra dimension to the completion process and is critical to becoming whole again. This step in the process simply speeds up the healing involving a certain traumatic experience and makes the likelihood of returning to that specific memory much lower. However, if you discover yourself returning to the same memory again and again when you're doing the completion process, it's not because you are doing anything wrong, and it doesn't mean the process isn't working. What is happening is that you had split into multiple fragments at that previous point in time as a result of the trauma, and each time you go back to the specific memory, you're integrating an entirely different aspect of yourself. So if you do get called back to the same memory to integrate additional aspects of yourself, simply honor the fact that the time is right to finally have those additional aspects healed. There are many, many reasons why the fractured aspects of our consciousness might not merge and integrate all at once, but commonly, when the fractured aspects of ourselves don't integrate all at once, it's because the aspects of our consciousness that split off at the time of trauma had different unmet needs. Therefore, it is likely that if you return to an already visited memory to integrate another inner child aspect that split off, you will find that child will have different needs than the previously integrated child self. There are a number of ways this integration could appear. It may look like ghosts being sucked toward and into the inner child. It may look like blobs or energy fields rejoining the inner child, or it may look like other duplicate children merging into one child. Be open to the way that your mind conveys this experience of the fractured aspects rejoining the core inner child. Step 11. Meet the child's needs within the memory. At this point, ask your child self in the scene if he or she feels ready to move forward emotionally and if he or she feels validated. Once the child gives you this feedback, you can take action to find a resolution to the situation at hand. This is where creativity and individuality are important. You must find out what is not being met for the child and then meet it. You could say things to your child self that makes her feel good. You could stand up for your child self, give suggestions and take suggestions, but ultimately trust yourself to know what she needs to do to alter the circumstance. Above all, trust the child self in the scene to know what she wants and needs and honor the individual needs that are being expressed. Seeing as how we have been unconditionally with the seeing as how we have been unconditionally with the feeling and have given the feeling the message that it is valid and right to be there, this is the part where we consider what steps must be taken to help the child feel better. The child self has different needs, depending on the traumatizing event. One child self may just want to be taken away from the memory into the safe haven and held indefinitely. One child may need to see resolution with regard to the particular event. For example, a child who had a particularly violent experience happen in his childhood home may be helped greatly by being allowed to set fire to that particular house. The completion process is not a time to teach the inner child a lesson like, sometimes we have to learn to be alone, or you can't live at college with your sister because it's for big kids, or we don't hit people. When we are working to heal using the realm of imagination, there is no reality that needs to be accepted by the child. We are after one thing and one thing only, a feeling of completion. This means a child who is suffering because an older sibling went to college may need you to build her a little hiding place in her sibling's dorm room so she can be with her beloved sibling at college. Or it might mean that your child wants to be held indefinitely. So find a way to have the child held indefinitely. It might mean the child wants new parents and a new life, and if so, the child gets new parents and a new life. Imagine that there are no limits to freedom of imagination in this step. I find that the most common need, however, is the need for defense. When we experience something traumatic, we tend to feel powerless. This is especially true when we are children and have much less choice and control over our environment. So, often our child self needs our adult self to stick up for him or her when the intensity level rises. It is tempting to decide that actions such as yelling or violence are all bad and thus avoid involving them in the visualization process. We need to understand that emotion is just like a vibrational scale, with powerlessness at one end and states of joy and love at the other end. Revenge, powerlessness, despair, or fear. I missed a sentence. Revenge is in fact an increase in vibration from the vibration of powerlessness, despair, or fear. So is hatred, and so is anger. Often the best way to get ourselves out of a vibration of powerlessness is to allow ourselves to move up the vibrational scale by visualizing some strong action being taken, even if it is revenge, a violent outburst, breaking something, or destroying something. This is the part of the completion process that invites the most resistance from people who would rather teach their inner child to take the high road. This is also the part of the process that invites resistance from people who feel that no violence should ever be entertained by our minds, lest it lead to more external violence. So don't be surprised if you feel yourself having a visceral reaction to what I've just suggested. That is normal. What most of us don't understand is that we run more of a risk of actually creating violence in our day-to-day life if we don't let ourselves move through and beyond the steps of revenge, anger, and defense in this safe imaginary setting. The person who does not allow himself to do that usually never gets beyond the feeling of victimization. Also, the person who doesn't allow himself to do that leaves it to the subconscious mind to fantasize about those things. This is dangerous because it can lead to more. It's a little dark, I can't see. This is dangerous because it can lead to more reactivity in present day. I say that right? Reactivity. A person who subconsciously fantasizes about revenge but consciously condemns it is at risk for either exacting passive aggressive revenge or for acting on impulse and actually getting revenge. This is often the case with crimes of passion. Visualizing acts of violence or defense for the sake of mental and emotional healing or increasing your vibration relative to a trauma is not the same thing as fantasizing about violence or homicidal ideation. There is a clear aim in this circumstance, which is to allow those thoughts and feelings to full expression within the safe environment so as to get to a feeling space beyond them where they no longer exist. The person who lets himself consciously experience revenge or violently defend himself in this process for the sake of healing not only moves beyond victimization, but also allows himself to move through and beyond the need or desire to get revenge, defend himself, or see someone hurt. In other words, we move through and beyond these darker feelings and urges and needs when we find they don't exist anymore. When doing the completion process, we cannot make a need or desire right or wrong. We must do what needs to be done in our visualization so that the inner child can move beyond the experience and rejoin the present. In our visualization, we aim for closure, no matter what it takes. This step of the completion process is particularly raw and not for the faint of heart, but it's also the part that gives the completion process the potential to heal even the worst of traumas. An inner child, for example, who is being chronically sexually abused, may need to see his or her perpetrator shot so they have no worry of future attacks. On the lighter end of things, an inner child who is being shamed by a parent may need the adult self to aggressively stand up for him or against the parent. I want to add that during this step, it may be tempting to try to help the parent in the scene or to counsel the perpetrator. This is not your job. In fact, often the need to help everyone is its own traumatic carryover from childhood. So if the inner child would feel better if her parent or perpetrator was to get help, we bring a third party to the scene to do that. Some people may choose to visualize their parent or perpetrator being helped by angels or a psychologist or by spirit guides or by someone they trust in life. We continue using a third party to help us, until the point that we are sure it's healing to us. It's healing to us to give this help within our visualization. Are we doing okay here? I think so. On time, yeah, we're doing good. Altering the causation. During this step, we can ask the child in the memory or visualization what he or she needs or wants, if anything, were possible, and then visualize giving that to the child. Or we may intuitively know what the child in the scene needs. What we must keep in mind is that our priority during this step is to meet the unmet need in the memory. If the child needs to be able to talk to the parent and for the parent to listen, we make that happen. If the child needs us to defend him or her, we do that. If the child needs to be held so she or he can just grieve, we do that. If the child wants a specific toy, we give it to him or her. If the child wants a friend, we give him or her the perfect friend. If the child needs to reunite with a loved one who has died, we give him or her to meet with we take him or her to meet with that person. This is the step where we actually alter the causation of the experience. We find a kind of mental and emotional resolution to what happened, so we can integrate it further as something that adds to our conscious life instead of taking away from it. Because because this is such an individual healing step, we will need to use our intuition to know what we uniquely need to achieve a feeling of resolution during this step. If you are assisting someone else through this process, your job is to inspire complete creative control in the person you are facilitating. It is also your job to give permission to the person to step way outside her current mental restrictions, i.e., get outside the box, to meet the needs of her inner child. It is helpful to offer options to the person for potential resolution on the off chance that he or she is currently not aware of those options for resolution. We should never aim to forgive someone or something during the completion process. Forgiveness cannot be forced, nor should it even be a goal. You cannot, in fact, make up your mind to forgive someone. Forgiveness is the organic result of healing. Interesting. Once we find a resolution for a trauma, we are no longer held captive in a space of pain about it. And so the bigger picture of the meaning of the experience and even the gifts it brought to our life are revealed. Then and only then can we stop condemning the experience. Then and only then can forgiveness begin to enter our reality. Step 12. Choice to stay or go. When a feeling of relief has occurred as a result of taking action to change the circumstance in the memory, we give the child the choice to stay in the memory or visualization or go to the safe haven. We need to trust this child to know what is best for him or her. More often, the child self will desire to leave the scene entirely, but on occasion the child self will not want to leave the scene and will want to move through and beyond the trauma within the context of the memory. This is okay, and it means that experience is the most healing and the most needed at this time. If the child self decides to go to the safe haven, we jump to step 14. If not, we continue to step 13. Step 13. Check for completion. If the child chooses to stay in the memory, we ask the child why he or she wishes to stay, and we respond accordingly. Sometimes when our child self does not want to leave, there may be additional fractured aspects that want to integrate but are still stuck. We can ask the fractured aspects to come forward from where they are hiding or stuck. We can ask them to merge as one, so we eventually are sitting across from only one child. The child, when asked again whether he or she wants to go to the safe haven, will now often say yes. If the child chooses to stay in step 13, we trust that the child knows what is best for him or her. In this step, we proceed to meet the child's needs in the memory itself. For example, the child may want to stay in the memory but add a pony. Or the child may want to stay in the memory but have some other aspect of the memory altered, such as the childhood house. One of the most common needs is that the child doesn't want to be alone, so we can leave our adult self or playmate of his choosing with the child in the memory indefinitely. If you find that it's too difficult to leave an aspect of yourself in the memory with the inner child who wants to stay, create another being to keep the child company. Create someone who will never leave the child's side, who will protect him, who will be a good friend, and who will serve as a reliable and secure attachment figure. A child may give a reason, making it apparent that the healing would be facilitated by the child staying there. For example, the child may say, "I don't want to leave because then mom would be lonely." In that case, you may then offer to take mom with the child to the safe haven or give mom someone else to keep her company. Okay. Or the child might say, I want to go to school tomorrow, or I want to see how it all turns out, suggesting that they genuinely wish to stay there. We need to trust our intuition about which feels the best to us and therefore which choice is in alignment with our overall healing. Rather than taking an action, the child may just need to be told something that would make him or her feel better as such. You can call me anytime you want, and I'll be there immediately. Or the child may want to be hugged before you go. The overall objective is to meet the child's final needs within the construct of the memory, rather than remove the child from the memory completely if they truly aren't ready yet. If the child chooses instead to go to the safe haven, then we either bring the child ourselves or have our safe support figure bring the child. All right, and that's going to do it for steps 7 through 13. Did pretty good on time. Honestly, I thought this was going to take me about an hour because I think the last one was about an hour long. Took me about an hour. Next chapter is very, very long. We're looking at this is the chapter 8's gonna probably be the longest chapter, I would say. So I think I will probably end up splitting this one into 2 parts for sure. So yeah, this week I'll be doing that one, and I'll split that one into 2 parts. We'll start with part 1. We'll start with part 1 after I do the next reading for the Kybalion, which I will be doing later tomorrow, and this will be going up today. So hopefully you guys are able to get something good out of this. I think steps 7 through 13 are probably some of the more interesting and thought-provoking steps. Again, I've yet to try this practice out on myself. Personally, I feel like I just don't think I would be able to get deep enough into an imaginative or meditative state for it to really be effective, but it is something I would like to try at some point in time. But yeah, I definitely want to go through the book first to kind of get an idea of how it all works, and then obviously I would have to go back and just follow things step by step, which is exactly what you should do. And if these readings aren't too butchered, you can use my uploads as a sort of live guide as you go through it. But anyway, that's going to do it for the reading today. If you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to drop a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet, so you can keep up to date on all the latest readings dropping on the channel and future content, which I promise is on the way and coming at some point soon. So that's going to do it for me. You guys take care. Thank you for your energy, and I will see you guys very soon. Later.